Hey Dad, what's the punkest thing you ever did?
The punkest thing I ever did? Resist mediocrity.
It's the Punkest Thing Podcast with your host, Gregory Downey.
I'm coloring outside your guideline. I'm passing out when you were passing out your room. 1, 2, 3, 4, who's punk? What's the score?
Check 1, 2, and welcome to the Punkest Thing Podcast. I am your host, the punkest daddy of them all, Gregory Downey, known to many as the Gratitude Coach. I am also the global mindset and culture lead and a member of the executive team at Heston's Beds. I'm the husband of 1, father of 8, and all-around fun guy. Thank you for being with me on this journey. This is episode number 2 of the Punkest Thing Podcast, titled, That's Not Very Punk of You. So here's the thing. Before we get started, I have a small confession to make. So I screwed up on the first episode, and I'm going to tell you how. So toward the end of the first episode, I mention this guy that I refer to as Big Brother Glenn. And I mentioned that I thought that I had talked about him at the beginning of the episode. But let me tell you a little secret. I started that first episode 3 times. And then I almost finished it a 4th time. And then I went back and started over. And then actually finished it the 5th time. Because even I still sometimes have these programs that play in my brain that try to convince me that I'm not good enough, that people aren't going to like it, that I don't really have anything important to say. And that's the short and long of it. But I pushed through. I listened to the voice of my coach inside my head, and I pushed through, and I got that first episode done. But what I said in the beginning of the episode, in the versions that you did not hear and will never hear because they have been deleted, was that there is this guy named Glenn. Glenn was the older brother of this kid named Larry. And Larry was, you could say he was like my best friend at the time for the space of a couple years. Larry was from Texas. His family moved to California. And with them came his older brother, Glenn, who, incidentally, loved punk rock and had a ton of bands on vinyl that I had never heard of. I mean, my first exposure to the Sex Pistols, the Clash, the Ramones, I mean, the list goes on and on. This was the stuff that Glenn listened to. And so when I was hanging out with Larry, this is music that I got exposed to. And Glenn, being Larry's big brother, and I spent so much time, with Larry and his family, that it was kind of like Glenn was a surrogate big brother to me. And so we just referred to him as Big Brother Glenn. And I think most of it came down to the difference in age. Because Larry was in the 4th grade when we met. I was in, I think, the 5th grade. And Glenn was like 18 years old. So that's a big difference in age, and I just thought he was the freaking coolest. So that's the part of the first episode that you didn't get to hear. And I would be remiss if I didn't tell that story, because that's how punk rock started for me. Okay, so what is this "that's not very punk of you" thing anyway? So if you look at the Urban Dictionary, this is how punk is defined. And I'm going to edit slightly for profanity, which is probably going to be seen as not very punk of me. But here at the Punkest Thing Podcast, I aim to do things my way, and that includes keeping it high vibe and family friendly. So here goes. Punk rock. Not caring at all about what is cool or not cool. What is punk rock or not punk rock? Or what is acceptable or what isn't. Plain and simple, punk is a state of mind. If you think you're punk, then you're punk. Who gives a rip? And there's this little dialogue that they have written in there. And the two characters are the punk and the poser. And the punk says, I listen to pop punk and I don't give a rip if it's cool or not. And the poser says, oh man, punks aren't allowed to like any bands that aren't in the punk rock approved handbooklet that we all get when we up our mohawks for the first time. What are you doing? You trendy mall shopping dork, blah, blah, blah. Up the punks. And that's how it goes. Within the punk community or the punk subculture, there are endless guidelines, standards, and ideologies about what it is to be punk and what punks should and should not do. And punks being humans, it affects the thinking and behavior of this segment of society, especially among the youth. Most humans seem to have an inherent desire to conform. Okay, so there you have it. But here's the deal. No one is more punk than anyone else. If you turn it into a punkness competition, then you aren't even punk. Plain and simple. You're just a poser. My oldest daughter knows how much it annoys me to be called a poser because I do a lot of things in my life that the punk subculture would consider not very punk. So what does she do? She looks for opportunities to push my buttons and she calls me a poser. And she knows that it drives me bonkers. And I think that's why she does it. It's her way of ribbing me. Okay, so about conformity. Raise your hand if you've ever seen the movie The Dead Poets Society. Now, I know I can't see you raise your hand, and you don't have to raise your hand if you feel ashamed that you haven't seen the movie. And in the movie, the main character, played by Robin Williams, is an English teacher at a very prestigious boarding school that is on the East Coast. I'm thinking it's Delaware. And again, his character's name is Mr. Keating, and he's an English instructor at this boarding school. He's not at the school very long before he starts to notice that there are these unwritten standards of conformity that exist within the school. And it affects the actions and behaviors of all of his students in his English class. And so to demonstrate a very powerful point, he takes them out to this courtyard, has them stand around the perimeter of this courtyard, chooses 3 from the group and has them start walking around the inside perimeter of this courtyard, kind of in a circle. It's more of a square. So they're walking they're walking around the square, and he starts chanting a marching cadence that you would hear, probably at basic training in the Army. And while he's chanting, the other boys that are standing on the perimeter begin to clap in unison. And they're watching these 3 boys go around this courtyard. And then all of a sudden, as if some unseen force overtakes the 3 boys that are walking, they start to walk in exact unison. Their strides all match up. And when it happens, when he notices that it happens, Mr. Keating says, "There it is, boys." And he points out the fact that they are now walking in unison. They conformed one to another. Now, I'm not saying that conformity is always a bad thing. But if done unconsciously, not knowing why, it can be a dangerous thing. In The Strangest Secret by Earl Nightingale, he quotes a philosopher and psychologist by the name of Rollo May. And he says, the opposite of courage in our society is not cowardice. It's conformity. People doing what everyone else is doing because everyone else is doing it. What drives people to conform? I believe it's a programmed need for what's predictable, familiar, consistent, or however you want to say it. It's a fear of the unknown. Some people call it being in a comfort zone. That they get into a comfort zone. They do what's comfortable. But I don't believe in comfort zones. I only believe in familiar zones. Because look at the facts, man. A lot of people who are in comfort zones are not really comfortable. I once heard it said that they're leading lives of quiet desperation. Have you ever heard the saying, the devil that you do know is better than the devil that you don't? Why do people say that? It's because people fear the unknown. Even if something is miserable or dangerous or problematic, most of the time they would rather do that than expose themselves to something unknown and new and unfamiliar. I mean, look, when a person's familiar zone is challenged, they will do almost anything to defend it, even when it means rejecting an opportunity to have a better life. And in some cases, even destroying personal relationships. I mean, this is why people are afraid of success. Yeah. You heard me right. People are afraid of success because success requires a desire to change, and change requires courage. And so many people in today's society lack real desire and courage to change. Now, you might say that that's crazy talk. And at one point in my life, I might have agreed with you. Maybe a little bit. But today, nope, no way. And let me explain to you why. Now, currently I live in Sweden, and most people who listen to this podcast probably do not know the geography of Sweden. So I'm going to use geography that's maybe a little bit more familiar, okay? So let's say that you live in Los Angeles, and I take your car and I park it in Las Vegas, and I fill the trunk with $1 million cash. And I tell you, you can have your car back and the cash. If you don't call the cops, right? But I tell you, you can have your car back and the cash, but you have to walk there to get it. Okay, now that means that you have to walk along Interstate 15. You do not get to hitch a ride. You do not get to take a bus. You can't fly. The only way that you're qualified to have the money is if you actually walk the whole way to your car. Now raise your hand, even if mentally, if you think that if I put that offer out there, if you didn't call the cops for me taking your car, right? But raise your hand if you think that if I put that offer out there, that you would actually make the trip from LA to Vegas to go get your car. Now, I know a lot of you are going to nod your head and you're going to raise your hand and you're going to say, yep, I would do it. Okay. But let's change it up a little bit. Let's say that you had to wear ballet tights, a pink tutu. You have to wear a hat with a propeller on it, and you have to pull a wagon full of rubber duckies. How many of you would still make the walk from Los Angeles to Las Vegas to claim your car and the trunk full of $1 million? And I know there are still some of you, maybe most of you, are nodding your head, raising your hand. Yep, I would do it. But what happens? Now, you may say that you would do it, and you start that walk, and people start yelling, honking their horn, shouting things out the window, pointing their finger, laughing, ridiculing you. How far do you walk before the money just doesn't look good anymore? Until you start thinking, this is really dumb. This is a really stupid offer. Man, I'm going to get that Downey guy. He took my car, put it in Vegas, $1 million in the trunk. Man, I'm really going to get him. Call the cops. But the question is, how far would you get before the money just did not look good anymore? Think about that. And then you start trying to convince yourself why it's okay to quit and how there's got to be a different way to make $1 million and why this was a stupid idea in the first place. And only people would have to be really greedy to do that. And you can think of all the ways to sell yourself and justify why you no longer want to make the walk from Los Angeles to Las Vegas to get your car with the trunk full of $1 million. So here's the deal. The reason that most people do not achieve more than they do in life, and they're willing to settle for less than what they're capable of and what they deserve, is because for whatever reason, they talk themselves out of it. And then they sell themselves on why it's okay to be mediocre. Now, I know that money isn't everything. Okay, it's not everything. I once heard it said that if you don't believe that money can buy you happiness, it's because you're not shopping in the right place. Now, I might believe that that's true to some degree. And I'll tell you what, I would rather cry in my Volvo than I would on a bicycle somewhere, stuck out in the middle of nowhere. But it's true, money isn't everything. But whatever you believe it means to be successful should be everything to you. And money is a tool. It's a vehicle. It can get you to a better place in life in many ways. But in order to be really committed, in order to really say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to stick it through, you have to attach something more meaningful to the money. The money has to be associated with something bigger and more emotionally appealing, more emotionally meaningful than the money itself. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and let's take a short break, and we'll be back with more of the second episode of the Punkest Thing podcast titled, That's Not Very Punk of You.
Pick up the phone and the dial tone, and it makes something in my fingers snap. The snap, it flies from hands to head like the shock of finding out something someone already knows. I offer you much more than I know I can afford. Scratch your name off of my list of people who still admire me. There are these pictures and ghosts and best friends fade to nothing in time. I promise you the world. That's 1/10 of what I'm delivering. It's like giving you Rhode Island in comparison. It's like giving Rhode Island away. It's like giving you Rhode Island in comparison. It's like giving you Rhode Island in comparison. It's like giving you Rhode Island. It's
are back. This is the second episode of the Punkest Thing podcast titled, That's Not Very Punk of You. And let's just keep going. So let's put this into context of what is and isn't punk. Punks only say that it isn't punk because it's something they can't see themselves doing. And it's no different from other people. People are afraid for other people doing things that they can't see themselves doing. When you have an amazing opportunity or something cool comes along or you're inspired to do something and you go and you tell people what you're going to do and how it's going to happen and how cool it's going to be, and then they just take a dump all over your dream or your ambition or whatever it is that you're hoping to accomplish. And it's because it's something that they can't see themselves doing, and they project their fear onto you. Not being punk or that thing that you want to do not being cool or feasible or possible or whatever, it's just an excuse. And they believe it lets them off the hook and gives them permission to stay mediocre. And you know what I always say about excuses?
Hello?
Hey, Clary.
Yeah, Dad?
What do I always say about excuses?
Whether it's the best reason or the lamest excuse, the outcome is the same.
Exactly. Okay, so here's the thing. People will change only when the perceived outcome is valuable enough that they're willing to endure the change. Until you see the value of the outcome, you'll just settle for being, doing, and having what you're being, doing, and having right now. So before you dismiss an opportunity to improve your situation, ask yourself, does this offer me a chance at a better life? Will this allow me to be, do, or have what I truly deserve? If the answer to that is even maybe, then there's a chance that it will. And until you give yourself permission to take a chance on you, very little in your life will change for the better. You'll just continue to be, do, and have the same thing that you are being, doing, and having right now. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten. And that's a fact. I got to a point in my life, I was about 19, 20 years old. I got to this point where I was tired of feeling like there was more to get out of life than I was getting at that time. I'd been working in fine dining from about the age of 17 on and off. And even though I grew up in a community where there were a lot of wealthy people, working in the fine dining industry put me in a position to actually interact with people who were older and much more wiser and successful than I was. And man, I started asking questions. What do you do? Do you enjoy it? How did you get to where you are? And it made a difference, not only in how people interacted with me, but it made a difference in how much they would tip me. And the more interest I showed in them, the more they shared. And the more I learned, and the more they would tip. And I was a pretty curious person anyway. I've always been a curious individual, but it began to pay to be curious, and not just in money. It began to pay in knowledge, recommendations, and I started really thinking, I want to do something more with my life than I'm doing right now. And so the more I interacted with successful people, the more I realized two things. That I had a knack for connecting with people, and that I was also stuck. Because I knew that I wasn't where I wanted to be in my life. And that bugged me. And I didn't know how to change it. And that terrified me. It terrified me so badly, that feeling of being stuck and being lost, that I couldn't sleep at night. And I literally would keep myself awake until I was so tired that I just didn't even have time to think about it. I would just put my head on the pillow and pass out. So here's the big question. Are you where you really want to be in your life? If not, Why not? What is keeping you? What is keeping you from getting the life that you truly deserve? Okay, so here's the thing. I'm going to share an exercise that will help you to determine whether or not you are living your best life ever. And it's quite simple, but it's very powerful. I teach this to every single coaching student that I work with. And I also share it in depth in my best-selling book, Attracting Miracles, which, by the way, I wrote with Dr. Joe Vitale, who wrote the foreword and the 8th chapter. And if you've ever seen the movie The Secret, Joe Vitale is one of the stars of that movie. And he is also a best-selling author and has written over 70 books in the area of law of attraction, personal development, you name it. The guy is a who's who in personal development. Okay, anyway, so here goes. You're going to make 2 lists. The first list is going to be 1 to 10 things that you do not want in your life. Okay? 1 to 10 things that you don't want in your life. Now, this could be something that's already happening, or it could be something that you worry might show up or happen in the future. You're probably asking yourself, why is he asking me to make lists of things that I don't want? Okay, so really quickly, I'm going to lay out the laws of academic learning. Number 1, do it just because I tell you to. Okay, don't question it. Just do it. Number 2, do it because you know that it works. Okay, and you will come to see that this works. Number 3, do it because you know why it works. Because you will come to know why this exercise works the way that it does. And then number 4, share it. You'll want to share it with other people because you'll see the effect that it has in your life. And you'll want to share that opportunity for people to change their lives. So just make the list of 1 to 10 things that you don't want in your life. Okay? Things that are happening now or things that you worry might happen. Now, for everything that you write down, ask yourself, why is that still showing up? Or why is that still happening? Why am I not free from that? Now, if it's something that's not in your life now, but might show up, or you're afraid might show up, ask yourself, why am I afraid of that? What do I think is the worst thing that would happen if that shows up for me? And whatever you write down, whatever the answers are, they're going to be a belief about why those things are either happening or why you are afraid of those things to happen. And it's important that you understand what the belief is behind the item on the list. Because you won't be able to change it until you change the belief behind it. Okay? All right, now, next list, 1 to 10 things that you do want in your life. Right? And don't be afraid to be audacious. Don't be afraid to be playful and to be, to think big and to dream big and give yourself permission to say, man, I would really like this to happen in my life. I'd really like to be, do, or have this thing. But whatever you write down on the list, you have to ask yourself, why don't I have that yet? Why has that not showed up for me? Why is that not happening? Why am I not experiencing that? And remember, everything that you write down that comes after because is a belief. It's a belief about why those things aren't happening in your life. And remember, in order to change the situation, you've got to be able to change the belief. Okay? But first you got to know what the belief is. You have to have an idea of what the belief is. Because it's your beliefs that drive your behavior. It's your beliefs that keep you where you are in your life right now. All right, so commit right now that you're going to do this exercise. Because if you do this exercise, it can absolutely be life-changing. All right, perfect. All right, now, so let's take a little break. And when we come back, we will wrap up the second episode of the Punkest Thing podcast.
I'd like to tell you about the strangest secret in the world. The strangest secret in the world. It's about this that I want to talk with you. What's wrong with men today? What's wrong with men today? Men simply don't think. What's wrong with men today? Men simply don't think. Men simply don't think.
Well, that's a new concept. I hadn't thought about that.
Pry the lid off your imagination.
Wow, that's powerful.
A survey was made one time that covered a lot of men, working men, and these men were asked this question: why do you work? Why do you get up in the morning? 19 out of 20 had no idea. If you ask them, they'll say, everyone goes to work in the morning. And that's the reason they do it, because everyone else is doing it. Men simply don't think. The opposite of courage in our society is not cowardice, it is conformity. And there you have the trouble today. It's conformity. People acting like everyone else, without knowing why, without knowing where they're going. We conform. And the trouble is that we're acting like the wrong percentage group. The 95% who don't succeed. When we say about 5% achieve success, we have to define success.
Let me give that to you.
Success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. If a man is working toward a predetermined goal and knows where he's going, that man is a success. If he's not doing that, he's a failure.
This one I had to struggle with. It was hard for me to give up my old blame list.
Now let's get back to our definition of success. Success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. Of a worthy ideal. Worthy ideal. Ideal.
And we are back with the second episode of the Punkest Thing podcast. I'm your host, Gregory Downey, the punkest daddy of them all, known to many as the Gratitude Coach. And this episode is titled, well, that's not very punk of you. Here's the thing. In my career as a world-class high-performance mindset coach, I have had the honor of working with and coaching for some of the very biggest and well-known names in personal development. We're talking Zig Ziglar, Joe Vitale, Jack Canfield, Laurel Langmeyer, and many, many more. But even before that, I have made a lifestyle of studying the science of personal growth and human potential. And part of that study has included reading classics. So have you ever read Alice and Her Adventures in Wonderland? Now, for those of you who have not, you're probably shouting at the top of your lungs, it's Alice in Wonderland. Well, it's not. I mean, it is if you've only seen the movie or the cartoon. But the book is actually called Alice and Her Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. Why do I bring up Alice and Her Adventures in Wonderland? So in the book, the movie, and the cartoon, there is a pivotal scene. And in this scene, Alice comes to a fork in her path. And who does she encounter at that fork but the Cheshire Cat? Those of you that have read the book, seen the movie, watched the cartoon, may remember that she asks a very specific question of the Cheshire Cat. And that is, which path do I take? Right? Which direction do I go? And the cat smiles. And he says, well, it all depends on where you want to end up. And she basically says, well, I don't know really where I want to end up. To which the cat responds, well, then it doesn't really matter which path you take. And he continues to say, But if you keep on traveling, you're certain to get there. Now, the interesting thing is, where is there? And really, there is anywhere. If you do not know where you want to end up, you will get somewhere. You may not like where you end up, but you are certain to get there. A guy named Stephen R. Covey wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Now, in that book, he says that habit number 2 is to begin with the end in mind. Now, let me repeat that. Begin with the end in mind. What does that even mean? What does it mean to begin with the end in mind? Basically, it means to know where you want to end up, to have a picture in your mind of where you want to end up before you get started. That if you want to make a better life for yourself, have a picture of what that looks like before you get started. You want to build a business? Have a picture of what it looks like before you get started. You want to write a book? Have a picture of what that looks like before you get started. You want to start a podcast? Have a picture of what it looks like before you get started. Any goal, any objective, any intention, anything that you want to be, do, or have in your life. You got to begin with the end in mind. You have to have a very clear picture of what you want that thing to look like before you get started. Now that means to know what life will be like once you have achieved that thing. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What does it sound like? And be as clear as you possibly can. Create the most vivid picture you've ever created about anything. You ever watched a child pretend something? You ever watched children, quote unquote, make believe? Why do they call it make believe? What are they making believe? And what does that even involve? If a child pretends to be a firefighter, they act as though they are a firefighter. If a child pretends to be a ballerina, they act as though they are a ballerina. Whatever it is that they want to pretend that they are, they act as though that is their reality. I had a colleague back when I was working for the Professional Education Institute. Her name's Tiffany Peterson. And she had a 3x5 card. It was an index card that she had in her cubicle. And on that cubicle, she had the words, act as if. Act as if. What does that mean? It means to act as if the thing that you want to be, do, or have is your reality. Act as though you are already there. Feel it as though it's already your reality. A philosopher and New Thought thinker who was very, very active during the 40s, 50s, 60s, and into the early 70s, a guy by the name of Neville Goddard, said that feeling is the secret. Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled and dwell in that end as though it is your current reality. And the more often you do that, that thing which you desire will become real. It will start to take shape in the physical realm. Now, I'm not going to dig too deep into this episode, but I didn't learn any of that in the punk rock community. And even talking about these things has often brought me under scrutiny and criticism. But you know what? I don't really care, because it's these principles, these ideas that have helped me to live my best life ever. And I'm not done. You have seen nothing yet. I'm not even there yet. I'm still on my way. I am still on my way. So there's a guy named Nick Nagel. And Nick Nagel said the punkest thing I ever did was when I left punk. There were too many rules building up as to what you can and can't listen to, where you can't shop, who's more punk than the other person. If he's got a mohawk and ripped jeans and patches, then he's obviously more punk than the other guy without that. I was tired of being put on a scale on how punk I was. I was tired of wanting to do something, then stopping and asking myself, is that punk of me to do that? I was tired of conforming. So I said, screw that. I'm not listening to your rules. And I left punk. Punk has too many rules now, and I am too punk for that. So I guess that was the punkest thing I could ever do. Well, folks, so here's the thing. I think the punkest thing is to stand up and say, you know what? I'm not leaving. You won't get rid of me that easily. Rather than jump ship, I am here on a rescue mission. I'm here to transform lives. I'm here to show the punks and non-punks alike that you can have your best life ever. You don't have to conform, and you can resist mediocrity. Look, if you love this episode, ask yourself, what specifically did I love about it, and how will I put it to work in my life? And then go and tell 3 people what you loved about this podcast episode within 60 minutes of answering those 2 questions. So there you have it. From the Punkest Thing podcast, I'm your host, the punkest daddy of them all, the Gratitude Coach, Gregory Downey. This has been That's Not Very Punkish. Go out and find your greatness.
1, 2, 3, 4, who's punk? What's the score?